Awesome, everybody. Thanks for being here. We're very excited to be hosting this webinar, Lunch and Learn, on behalf of Ghost Ranch Communications and Presentation Thinking. This is Build Your Best Marketecture. It's going to be about a 25-minute presentation, I think, that Allie Wilson has put together for us. It's going to go deep. It's going to be awesome, and I think it's going to touch a lot of fun, familiar nerves with a lot of you who've been deep in the product marketing weeds over the years. So yeah, let's get started. And what on earth, is presentation thinking? For those of you who don't know us, myself, I'm Mikey Medusky. I'm the founder of Ghost Ranch Communications. We're a presentation design agency, and we've spent a lot of time in PowerPoint, Google Slides. We say, not everybody thinks of B2B slideware as the most glamorous thing, but we actually live and breathe this stuff. We love it, and we're on this mission to make it sexy. Presentation thinking started as our podcast. So Molly and I are hosts of a weekly podcast where we stop and break down many different things that could help us become better presenters and better presentation builders. And so, we'll do everything from deconstruct some popular TED Talks, see what they have in common. We'll interview guests, we'll read books, and we have a really fun study club and book club. So yeah, if you want to follow along, you can find that at presentationthinking.com or just about anywhere that you listen to stuff. So we're on Spotify, Apple Tunes, all that. But funny enough about Ghost Ranch Communications is we are rarely the people up on the stage. Our clients are always the ones who we are working with behind the scenes to make them look good. So it's always funny when we're the ones sort of putting those shoes on and getting up in front of people and actually feeling what that feels like. And so it's a really good practice in empathy for us, Allie, as we've talked about over the years. And so, it's an exciting time to say look, we've picked up quite a few things over the years working with some of the brightest minds in the presentation world, in the business world. And just through osmosis, we've picked things up from them. Or in Hamilton speak, as presentation designers, we get to be in the room where it happens. As a business nerd myself, who happens to love design, love storytelling, presentation design is sort of this the intersection of business, story, and design. And it gives us this front row courtside seat into these really exciting strategy rooms where we're working with the CEOs, the CMOs, the leaders of product marketing on these really important decks and ideas that manifest in slideware a lot of times, but we can be there and actually collaborating, picking things up with some of our heroes in the business world. So through osmosis, again, we've picked up a thing or two. And what stands out to us about the best presentations we've ever seen or been, helped build is there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just about making slides look pretty. It's about so much more. And that's what we really think presentation thinking is. It's not just art, it's also science. It's not just devising that great content and the strategy that goes into thinking, but geez, then how do you deliver it? And so if you really want to be this well-rounded, holistically minded presenter or business communicator, or you want to help your team present and communicate better, you can draw from so many disciplines, right? From not just design and motion graphics and animation, how do you progress through a deck, but geez, the neuroscience, the psychology of bringing someone along on that journey, storytelling, copywriting. We could look at broadcast media, so many different avenues that we like to stop, pause, think about, and pull in to create more impactful, more just really thoughtful slides and presentations. So over the years, we've been we should put on, because we're going so deep on these certain topics, we had this idea, what if we put on these lunch and learns that just totally dissect one slide type at a time. We did a cover slide topic webinar where all we talked about for 30 minutes was the do's and don'ts of your cover slide, which sounds so specific. And yet, when do you really stop to think about this stuff? And the one we've had, Allie and I and the team have been dude, we should do a marketecture presentation all about marketectures. What's that slide that keeps so many marketers up at night? And it's so iterative. We've worked on these things for hundreds of hours and we revisit it all the time. But every great marketer, B2B, especially in tech, has spent a ton of time in the architecture space. And I am so excited to present Allie Wilson, our executive creative director at Ghost Ranch, not only because she has been in the weeds and in the trenches helping some of the best in class around build so many architectures, but recently she's really put her thinking cap on, like dove deep into her own research, so many interviews with practitioners out there to pull together what I think is a really, really exciting presentation. So Allie hails, she's coming to us live from Asheville, North Carolina. She's got a master's from Savannah College of Art Design in design management. I can't think of anyone better to guide us through this. So Allie, take it away. Thank you so much for sharing.
And I just want to throw in there, Mikey, please add any questions in the chat or the Q&A as we go along, because we will definitely have some time for that at the end.
Okay, awesome. And thanks, Mikey. And a great mention of the empathy builder, because anytime I'm actually building a presentation for myself or something like this, it's an insane reminder of how hard the people work on the presentations that we end up designing on our end at Ghost Ranch. So thank you so much for coming. And not only am I matching my illustration, it wasn't on purpose, but I guess, oh, Mikey and Molly turned their cameras off, but all three of us are matching on accident today. Not intentional, but can't wait to talk to you about my favorite thing today, cake. Just kidding, not really. But prepare yourself for a whole lot of cake metaphors surrounding my favorite slide type to design the architecture slide. As Mikey mentioned, I did a lot of research. And so to get some more insight beyond our own experience here at Ghost Ranch, I chatted with a few people who have seen a architecture or few in their day. So big thanks to Chris, Mandy, and Steve for letting me pick your brains about what it takes to make an excellent and impactful architecture. So here's a glimpse of what's to come. We'll start out by defining what a architecture even is. And then we'll talk about what the stakes are of having a great one. We'll imagine a world where your architecture is amazing and what that can look like. And then there's some big challenges that come with developing a architecture. So we'll talk about those, and of course, how to make it impactful, along with a lot of really great architecture examples. And of course, we'll experience a whole bunch of cake metaphors along the way. So let's get to it. So what even is a architecture? There's a reason our talk today is littered with cake metaphors. However, it was pointed out to me that the term layer cake might not be widely used or understood. So layer cake is a term used to describe an approach to building out an architecture. And what I like about it is it takes something that's otherwise pretty abstract, so trying to visualize how software and tech products work together is not easy because they're not necessarily tangible. So a layer cake approach tends to look something like this. Does that look familiar? The layers in a cake could also be seen as puzzle pieces, Tetris blocks, all the elements of a market offering coming together in one place and visualized in a way that represents how they either coordinate with each other or with specific personas, something like that. But more to come on that in a little bit. Has anyone seen something like this before? So I wanted to start out with an example that isn't working well, just for reference. So why is this one not working? It's an architecture. You can tell someone technically minded created this and actually put a lot of really great thought and effort into it. Their goal was 100% accuracy, representing every piece of every product and every capability, every connection point. But there's really no story around what any of it's solving for. So it's a flow chart with paths to follow. It would be pretty difficult for a salesperson to speak to, and especially difficult for a customer to understand where or how they fit into this. So even in its perfectionism, there's still a lot left up for interpretation here. What do the connections mean? Why does any of this even matter? So while that last visual was an architecture, this is what it looks like when it's reimagined as a marketecture. There's a story to be told here, how products and capabilities fall into different buckets of needs. There's still a ton of information, but it's organized and compartmentalized in a way that makes it much easier to follow. So consider this a tease. I didn't want to get too far into talking you without actually showing them architecture, but we'll get to a lot more examples in a little bit. So a little bit of history, companies would build architecture diagrams around their products. so that they could deeply understand how everything worked. Then marketing folks would get involved so they can make it more consumable and easy for business people to understand. So really, the architecture portion of a marketecture can be seen as the science behind baking a cake. So if we're talking about a product or a set of products, it explains how the different ingredients or products work together as a system, the way that those ingredients interact with each other, the specific ways they need to be combined to do what they need to do. The marketing spin to this would be the way that you would describe the flavors of a cake and make someone want to eat it. So if they don't know how good it is and why that particular cake is the best they're ever going to eat, why would they want to waste the calories on it? But if that's too much metaphor, understandable, marketectures were really born out of the need to take an architecture diagram and make it more consumable and easy for business people to understand. So a marketecture essentially is a visual representation of your market offering, where the structure makes sense, the connections are clear, and it's easy to understand. You could present your product or products, your services, capabilities. An easy way to make your marketecture overly complicated would be to try and layer all of these things onto one diagram together. The key is to focus on a story around how your offering works together and why it matters rather than express every single detail. If it makes sense to represent more than one of these, of course, that's totally fine. But the idea is to try and keep things as simple and clear as possible. Your marketecture slide is a great place to land when you're having a conversation with a customer. It's a great slide to keep up on the screen for a while if you're discussing potential solutions. And that's why it's so important to make sure it's telling the right story. So who's involved in the process? Typically, a product marketing leader is heading up the charge to get this thing put together, but they can't do it alone. They collaborate with other people across the org, product management, engineers, and of course, it's always good to have buy-in from your CMO. But then who benefits? But pretty much everyone benefits from a great marketecture. Salespeople use it to represent the entirety of an org's offerings at a glance. It's a great tool for marketing. Execs can use it to discuss business strategy. And of course, ultimately, the end buyer benefits by having a better understanding of what they're hopefully purchasing. All right, so what's at stake here? Why is it so important to have a great marketecture? Really, what happens if your marketecture sucks? Think about who's benefiting from speaking to your marketecture slide. Often, salespeople are using it to sell whatever it is that you're offering. So let's say an everyday salesperson from your org is describing your product to a potential client. Here's what they're describing. Let's pretend that this is the visual that they're sharing. It's a strawberry, right? Nice and ripe. As a prospect, I'm like, oh man, that looks like a pretty good strawberry. I like strawberries. It seems like a good enough strawberry. I understand that it's a strawberry. I see the seeds. I have an idea of what a strawberry tastes like and what to expect from a strawberry. But wait, it's not a strawberry. It's cake. Yep. Another cake metaphor for you. Is it Cake, which is also a series on Netflix? But I digress. Think of the strawberry portion as the marketing shine, the beautiful frosting on the outside, the polish. So the cake on the inside, the gut, those are the details about how product offerings work together as a system. We can look at this a couple of different ways, and it's problematic no matter what. If your marketecture isn't working well, they could be describing your offering in a way that's entirely misleading. Too much shine, look at how pretty the strawberry is, but not enough substance, what's inside of the strawberry. They could be missing the best parts of what's making your offering special. I mean, geez, the strawberry is actually cake. Strawberries are great, but I like cake more. They could be oversimplifying and missing key connections between your products that would cinch the deal for a potential customer. All to say, if the marketecture truly acts as a conversation slide, that landing place for your conversation, and you want your team to know that they're describing the whole cake and not just a strawberry. And at the end of the day, you want everyone to be telling the same story. And that's because Your strategy falls apart if everyone in your org is saying different stuff about what you do. If your team doesn't have a solid architecture, they'll speak to your products and offerings in their own special way. And that type of control loss can be extremely problematic. And when your message is inconsistent, it weakens your ability to represent your product well and stand out in the market. So then, what if your architecture was amazing? What then? So if your architecture is amazing, meaning it's easy to explain and understand, it can really help with alignment. Everyone will describe what you offer and how it works the same way. The result of that, it means it's super easy to train people. Your strategy is locked in. You have control over the way that customers are perceiving your offering. And that means you can get some sleep at night, because an amazing architecture gives everyone at your org equal footing when describing what it is that you do. So if you've built some architecture before, you know there are some big challenges to overcome. They're just not easy slides to nail down. Like Mikey mentioned earlier, hundreds of hours go into architectures all the time. So when it comes to building architectures, there are typically a lot of stakeholders involved. It can quickly become a too many cooks in the kitchen sort of situation. Opinions are strong and they are diverse. And again, the opinions are strong. We've seen architecture projects really go through the ringer as they get past it from stakeholder to stakeholder over time. So bear with me, I've got one more cake metaphor, and it also happens to be a Netflix series. Didn't do that on purpose either. So starting off with great intentions, your architecture might be really easy to understand. If the structure is coming from one perspective, your perspective, someone else's perspective, with a specific goal in mind, it can be beautiful. It could even be with a designer's help, or if you're a power user, on brand, digestible, and trainable. But then you start shopping it around. Everyone has a different perspective, and those are very important perspectives. So you start to modify your architecture. With each new voice comes changes, and sometimes those changes don't jive with the thoughts and changes from someone else. So the story starts to become less and less clear from where you started. So 50 or so rounds later, your architecture is no longer recognizable. So too many people have touched it, too many opinions have been layered in, and it no longer makes sense. There are pieces that are recognizable, of course, but they might not be telling the right story at this point. So what the heck can you do to prevent that? There's no denying that the opinions of all those important people involved matter. So we say try to aim for about 80% accuracy. That's right, your architecture is just never going to be perfect. It's never going to please everyone. So the sooner that you can accept that, the easier your life will become. This rule works really well as long as your content doesn't end up being misleading as a result. And then, of course, simplification is key. It's going to be what helps salespeople understand and therefore communicate your offerings consistently. So simplifying your process as much as possible from the very beginning. Try to get your stakeholders aligned from the get-go around what the final intention of your architecture will be. So even establishing a final say type of person helps from the beginning to try and get as many people as possible aligned. Of course, this doesn't mean ignoring feedback and insights from other stakeholders. It's about acting as a filter to apply the right information and the right feedback to make sure the architecture is telling the right story. So listen to feedback, apply it, but always be a steward of that original intention and goal you set out to accomplish. By acting as a filter and applying the right feedback and right voices from the right places, you can craft a architecture that expresses the big picture without getting too muddy. Okay, so working with a ton of stakeholders is extremely challenging, but I'm going to flip the script on you just a little bit here. While having a lot of cooks in the kitchen can cause a bit of a mess, it can also be seen as a really amazing opportunity for your team to huddle and come up with awesome ideas around your business strategy. It's a way to get aligned, to recognize opportunities that live within your market offering that maybe you wouldn't see otherwise. So as a group, maybe you start to notice that there aren't as many capabilities within some of your products as the others, or that you're missing products entirely that could help you be more competitive. That could potentially determine an M&A strategy. You could even discover that some of your products are lopsided, and it helps you realize that you might need to build out some more features within them. So all of the iteration that happens while building a marketecture is actually really, really healthy for an organization. Don't be afraid to try out all sorts of stuff to get to the right solution, and to revisit it on a very regular basis. That could be quarterly, could be yearly. But if you do that, it means you're revisiting what your full stack looks like, checking for gaps, trying new ways to communicate how things work together. It keeps you from becoming stagnant. So from a design perspective, it's always smart to keep a safe option in your back pocket. So if you're trying to break out of that typical layer cake marketecture mold, do it. Showing ideas that range from that strawberry with ultimate, marketing shine to cake, that like representation of substance, showing a range of how much of that you show can be really helpful to brainstorm and come up with something that's working well for almost everyone. So this is a really great example that I wanted to show you of how a client of ours revisited their marketecture many times. It's also a great case for starting out with a sketch. Sometimes stepping away from the computer for a bit and putting pen to paper can help you get clarity around what the essential elements are to show in your stack. So we brought that marketecture to life from a sketch. Nice and editable, clean and clear. But then it was time for a fresh new take on how to represent things stacking up. Brainstorming on a whiteboard, thinking about how the ecosystem surrounds the rest of the marketecture. And here you can see it evolve from sketch to cohesive graphic. It's not your typical marketecture, but it is telling an interesting story. During the next revisit, it made sense to revert back to a more standard layer cake type of visual. You'll see that the labels have changed. The level of complexity is a little bit different. They're trying to see, trying out some new things to see what works. You'll also see how the visual language and brand itself changes as the company evolves. There's a different sense of hierarchy here and a story woven in around how to move prospects from anonymous to known within the marketecture. And then, yes, again, evolving the marketecture to represent more pieces of the puzzle, more layers of the cake. A marketecture should be treated as a living, breathing document, moving and shifting as your org changes. All right, now it's time to get to some of the good stuff and lots of examples. So how do you make a marketecture visually impactful? But first, what even makes a marketecture good, or let's just say serviceable? Because everyone's problem is the same. You know the problem, you know the value that your solution brings. If that's coming across in your marketecture, that's good. If it's easy to understand, the hierarchy makes sense, it's 80% accurate, nice, that's great. So then what takes your marketecture from good to great? Well, everything just mentioned for making it good, plus being story-driven and connecting to the rest of your messaging. It's important to show why the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. If your org remembers how to speak to your marketecture, the prospect remembers what you want them to remember, that's great. But above all else, if your team is actually using your marketecture as intended and it's adopted across the org, then that means you're killing the game. So a great way to make your marketecture truly memorable is to represent your org's unique perspective. So what is your secret ingredient that makes your offering better than the others? Taking a stance, having an opinion, explaining why the structure is the way that it is in a way that's easy to understand is what will set you apart from your competitors. The most impactful marketectures are ones that are driven by story and the point of view of the company. And yes, ultimately, the marketecture can live on one slide to be that conversation slide, but your marketecture isn't a messaging framework and it still needs to map back to your key messages somehow. The build-up, the messaging, and the story of the deck ahead of this slide should all be cohesive and come together when you land on it. There's a pretty simple recipe to follow when creating an impactful architecture. You'll want to connect your story to your design and the way that the offerings are visualized. You want to develop clear visual hierarchy. So think about the most important part that your audience wants to see or understand. And then make sure your point of view or your secret ingredient is nice and prominent. And definitely simplify wherever possible. If you're making an actual cake, you don't include directions on how to raise the chicken that makes the egg, for example. You make it clear what is working together, how to combine things to land at the cake, the reason that your offering should be enticing to your customer. And now, about time to walk you through a few examples of architectures we've developed at Ghost Ranch, and also an example of something that we saw out in the wild that we really liked and didn't design ourselves. But a question to think as you look through all of these, are these architectures more strawberry, marketing shine, or more cake with a depth of information? So we've got the Strabometer here. We'll have a rating for each of these architectures coming up. So first, let's bring this one back. Nice little callback here. So we can get an idea for how the Strabometer works. So what do you think this one is? Is it strawberry or is it cake? If you guess cake, yes, this is mostly cake. This thing is made of layers. However, it would be a little bit more accurate if those layers were even scrambled up a bit. Maybe it's a little bit more like cake batter. But yep, that's how the Strabometer works. Okay, this architecture is wonderful. And here's what I love about it. It's very clear, and you can find the needs of a specific audience within it. It still has that layer cake vibe, but it's not your typical boxy stack. It remains organized, clear, and easy to understand, but it's visually interesting. The platform pieces that apply across the board envelop every layer on the bottom. So it really feels like the core product and pro and fintech products are encased within them. The core product, even from a naming perspective, works really well here. These base offerings are shown at the center, at the core of the architecture, making it clear that they make up the primary offering for the company. Then the outer ring, pro and fintech, are add-on specialty products, kind of like the icing on the cake. So how would you rate this one? In my opinion, felt like it was a pretty equal balance of shine and substance. And this right here is a fantastic example of how a architecture can work as a system beyond a single slide. So I love the way that this one presents the overall structure as a solution to start. You get a really great bird's eye view of the full stack, very classic layer cake, starting with the platform at the bottom, administration, data and analytics, then you've got your products, and finally external applications across the top. Mandy was describing this type of style as almost like building a house, like starting with the foundation and moving all the way up to the roof, which I love. So how would you rate this one? As it stands, this single slide on its own, I feel like it's a little bit more on the strawberry side. It's pretty, it's shiny, but there isn't a ton of depth, and there still could be a lot left open to interpretation. But there's more. The architecture itself opens up those layers to represent the actions and features within, kind of like dresser drawers opening up to show the contents inside. So since the solution was expressed so simply and clearly on the previous slide, adding detail around the features and how things work on this slide makes it really easy to hone in and understand how the pieces all work together really well. In this state, kind of feels like an equal balance of strawberry to cake to me. And then I've got a bonus slide popped in here. This could probably be its own lunch and learn, but it really does fit in nicely after the architecture, showing how these solutions fit into a maturity model or a customer journey. So you'll see the comparison between before and after Zinc, ranging from a state of complete unawareness to transformation as a result of using Zinc over time. So a question we often get about building impactful architectures is around animation. Should you animate? Shouldn't you animate? So this is an excellent example of how animation can be really successful and used as a powerful storytelling tool. So it's also one of our favorite examples of how to build the story out that leads up to and lands at a complete architecture. So you'll see as we build these sections out one at a time, you get a lot of focus on the information. You get a really nice amount of detail without being overwhelmed. And you also start to get an idea of how everything works together. And then you land at an all-encompassing visual that's super simple, it's easy to understand, and it's visually compelling. So when working with animation, a really hot tip to keep in mind is that you want to make sure the end state of your architecture is fully formed. So animation requires a lot of building out of layers. Sometimes those layers don't look great in an end state when it's not animated. So there's text layered on top. Some of the information is hidden. So a great rule of thumb is make sure that end state of your architecture is PDFable or like screenshotable so that you could print it out if you wanted to, and you would be able to see everything you needed to see. So what do you think? Is this strawberry or is it cake? We rated this one as a really nice balance between shine and depth. If this visual, the one that you're seeing right now, didn't have those really nice animated pieces leading up to it, it would maybe be a little bit more on the strawberry side. But the story that got us here gives us the right information to understand the intricacies behind this simpler, cleaner image that we've landed on. And this is a great one for Octave. Does it have an element of a stack and how things visually layer together? Yes. Does it follow a flow and a journey of information? Absolutely. But it does it in a really visual way, with imagery doing most of the heavy lifting. So it's very clear how you progress from one state to the next without trying to express every single connecting point. There's still enough information and context to understand how to get from point A to point B, but it's easy on the eyes. So for the Strawbometer, I'd say more strawberry, less cake. Okay, we love this one, but it definitely toes the line between simple and straightforward and extremely creative. But it works, at least for some. I know this particular architecture was a bit polarizing, and there was a very simple layer cake version that was also presented. You might be surprised, but I actually think this is a pretty perfect balance of strawberry and cake. At a glance, it seems like it would be more strawberry because it's so illustrated, but there is a great sense of hierarchy. The layers of information express a lot about what the offerings can do. This makes my point of iterate, iterate, iterate pretty clear. I think these were 2 of like 15 concepts presented. But so this is that more simple layer cake version I just mentioned. They ultimately went with a more unique take on the last slide, but figured it would be helpful to show this one as well. So this one definitely shifts a bit more towards cake, but it's still a lot of strawberry in there too. There's a lot of really great brand presence. So full disclosure, this is the example that Ghost Ranch did not design, but it's an awesome example we've seen in the wild by SailPoint. So I love the sense of hierarchy established here. So what could otherwise be quite an eyeful, there's a lot of content. The dimensionality and the use of color really helps guide you through it beautifully. You know just where to look. So strawberry score, right down the middle. Beautiful, but with lots of depth. All right. This one's the wild card. We love this set of slides at Ghost Ranch. We talk about it all the time. It's such a smart and cool visual, but is it a architecture? What do you think? The all strawberry, no cake? Kind of, right? I'd say yes, but it does have this really great follow-up slide that gives you more information. So the color-coded pieces from that Rubik's Cube are broken down into products. So it really does end up giving information. So it could be a architecture, but I don't know. Something to think about. Okay. to wrap things up, I'd say these are the key takeaways for today. Work to find a balance between shine and substance with your marketectures. Think about who will be using it and what could potentially be left up for interpretation. Your story is your strategy. If you can get everyone in your org telling the same story, it'll help lock in strategic alignment across the board. Your marketecture will never be perfect. Make as many people happy as you possibly can without sacrificing simplicity. And then finally, iterate, iterate, iterate. Your marketecture is a living, breathing document that should be updated and brainstormed around all the time. And that's it. I think Mikey and Molly are going to pop back on here and we'll answer any questions.
Thank you, Allie. That was awesome. I think you're the official Chief Marketecture Officer. Some of the key takeaways for me as well, just like, I mean, literally visualizing the representation of that market offering, like you said, like in some of those conversations I know with Mandy, you know, like it wasn't until the whole team got together, like the CTO, the CMO, the CEO, strategists, everyone, product marketing, and you actually like lay it out there visually, because you think you know where you're going, you think you have this roadmap, and you think you know how you stand up against competitors. But as you indicated, like, geez, when you do lay it all out here, we thought we had this really robust, you know, stack, or this one component of our stack. But if you compare us to such and such competitor, like we're kind of weak here. And she actually said, like, it literally drove their M&A strategy at a huge company where they had cash to deploy. They're like, we could build this thing, or let's just go buy a couple of these, you know, roll them in, and now they're features, you know. So the power of visualizing things, the process of doing it, and getting everybody together to hash those big hard questions out is probably just as valuable as the end result, that end slide, right?
Yeah. As painful as it can seem sometimes, because I know they're just tough. It's tough to get everyone aligned, but it is that, you know, that end state is great, but that process, it brings up so many conversations and it brings so many different people together with those great perspectives.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I had a question, unless there's any others in the crowd. I know, like, I was hoping to ask you, you know, like, Allie, like the role of editability, like why, okay, I like, I'm sure marketers have seen some beautifully designed diagrams that are sort of like locked because they were designed in a certain like Illustrator to the T. They're perfect, right? Probably great strawberry factor. What helps when it can be done, like designed in the tool, like Google Slides or PowerPoint? Like what's to benefit the team?
Well, it's kind of like what I was saying with the, like, taking a pen to paper, and even working on a whiteboard. It's that ability to change things easily. If you're locked into a design and you're trying to edit on top of it, and you're not necessarily a user of the tool, or it's just a flattened image, you feel kind of stuck. And that's why, yes, sketching is great because you can really get your ideas out. But having something in something like PowerPoint, Google Slides, even, where you can have multiple people working at the same time, just looking at things as building blocks and actually shifting things around in real time and moving them, as like something else we like to talk about is slide sketching. So taking, you know, not even being precious about it at all, but being able to, like, throw that preciousness out the window and just move things around really easily without feeling like you're trapped, I think helps open up those ideas for what changes you can make.
Awesome.
Right. Grace is thrown in the chat here to kick us off. After that, where in the deck is it most impactful to place your marketecture? I'm sure it varies on what kind of deck you're creating, but where have you found they should pop up, Allie?
Yeah, definitely that one example I showed for Zinc is a great one. So they're speaking to the solution that they're offering, and then it's like, here's your solution, and here's everything that we can do to get you to your solution. So definitely needs to be somewhere in the deck where there has been, you know, enough messaging leading up to it, where all of the products and all of the offerings make sense, and your audience can start to see themselves within that space.
Yeah. Okay. And Laura is asking, when does it make sense to create multiple marketectures for different audiences? And you guys kind of talked me through this as I was learning more detail about marketecture.
Yeah.
So this is a super important one. Go ahead.
Yeah. It really doesn't. You kind of want one marketecture to rule them all, because that's what's going to keep everyone aligned. So it's not necessarily about making different marketectures for different audiences, but maybe it's about the way that you speak to that marketecture changes, or you're highlighting different parts of your marketecture. But you should really have everyone on the same track and locked into the same marketecture.
Yeah.
For that alignment.
If you've listened to the podcast or joined any other presentation thinking project, Mikey and I talk about audience centric messaging so often. So there is so much iteration and changing per audience. But I think for a marketecture, it's your big picture and you're often zooming in on one particular piece of it, depending on who you're talking to. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Tamara is asking, how do you convince someone in your org that is, maybe there's an older outdated marketecture that needs to be updated or redesigned? How do you convince them it's like worth it and going to be impactful?
Ooh, well, it's kind of like, again, because you're bringing everyone together when you're redesigning a marketecture, can feel daunting, but the end result of it is such a great experience, because all of your salespeople, everyone who's using it, it almost feels like a fresh new outfit. People just like the way that you describe things and your messaging can start to become stale over time. And if there's a change and it's a positive change, and those changes are happening because of things that you're seeing with competitors or changes that are happening internally, it will only represent you in a more accurate way, and it might just re-energize your team to speak to it, and to be more excited about speaking to it.
Yeah, and there's stats out there, right? Pretty widely accepted that misalignment is a $1 trillion problem between marketing and sales. If you're going to leave 10% of revenue on the table because due to misalignment, I think there's a pretty big business case to revisiting the marketecture to make sure everybody's on the same page, right? It's an amazing tool once you do get it right, but commit to the iteration that Ali really highlighted here. Molly, do we have time for one last question? How are we doing?
Yeah, I think we got time for one more, and then I know you've got a few things to wrap us up here, Mikey. I was wondering, I know we were talking about this amongst ourselves, but yeah, when we add more like from a single product to a multi-product company, how do you like fit that into your marketecture, or is it like a total redesign?
Yeah, Mandy described that solve for that really nicely. So when she's talking to us about that sort of standard layer cake approach, where you're starting with your platform on the bottom, think of that as the foundation of your house, and then think of that data layer that comes after that as like the floor of your house, and think about your products as the furniture in your house, the people moving within it, and then that ecosystem is like the roof. So think about that. If you're thinking of it that way as a house, then think of it as more of like a hotel. So it's more floors, there's more complexity within it. So you've got to bring it in. It's going to make your architecture more complex, and that's okay. It means you're going to have more voices in the room and more stakeholders, but they just think about like adding more floors to that house and more layers, but in that same context of the foundation all the way up to the roof.
I love that. Yeah, that's also another metaphor we could lean into.
Great. Yeah.
Sure.
We see a lot of bucketing, categorization, taxonomy, like the PMMs who lead these things are so careful with their words and the semantics involved. Like, well, if we're calling this a platform, you can't call this a platform. There's only one platform. And, it's like, it's hilarious to observe this, but it's really important. And that's why they fight tooth and nail over some of these, the words. And Missy asks a great question, I think worth, throwing out there is like, has a first iteration, like one of those wild card like architectures, let's flip it upside down, ever spawned or catalyzed like some new ideas that you've seen, Ali, or like really got a team you're working with sort of like going and rethinking what they're even working on in the first place?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that one Oracle example is a favorite. That one threw some folks for a loop for sure. But yeah, it happens. It happens, and sometimes it lands it, and it also depends on who you're working with and who's going to be using it. So, if the people who are using it can speak to something that's a little bit more of a wild card option really well, and it fits their personality, and it feels, it's like I said, like a new outfit. When you're presenting to something, it's very personal. And if they can present it well and it feels like an exciting way to talk about their product, I've seen it go that way plenty of times.
Awesome. Well, I think, Molly, we're going to have a recording of this. And if you have any other questions, hit us up. We're at Ghost Ranch. And if you haven't heard of Ghost Ranch, we're the people who, if you happen to mess that architecture up or any other key slides at your organization, we bring that peace of mind. We deliver like the wolf in Pulp Fiction. And that's our goal. We want to make your life easier. We want to help you build and bring that the stories to life, those ideas. We're committed to this medium. Obviously, we've nerded out for 45 minutes about one slide type. So clearly we're invested in this stuff and we love it. So ghostranch.com, visit us anytime. And we have a new tab, a new page up on our website called the Pitch Planner. So ghostranch.com/pitch-planner. We actually have some amazing new content. We partnered with Steve Earle, an incredible B2B product marketing leader and consultant and visionary. And we're really excited about this tool called Slide Zero that can actually help you think about the purpose of a new deck that you might be working on. So it's sort of a story starter, a framework to say, hey, before I jump into PowerPoint, stop, do some presentation thinking yourself, get some, pen to paper and think about like, why am I creating this presentation in the first place? Got some cool resources and check it out. So with that, thank you again. This is a Presentation Thinking Ghost Ranch webinar. Keep on pitching. We hope to have you back anytime. And if you have new ideas for new webinars, slide types you want us to cover, send it. Thank you, Allie. This was awesome. Can't thank you enough.
You'll be getting the recording by end of day tomorrow, so you can relive all of our cake metaphors. Thanks, everyone.
Strawbometer is going to, I think Merriam-Webster is gonna consider adding it next year. It might be the word of the year.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone for joining. Yeah.
Thank you.
Go the distance. Yeah.